In this lesson, we will cover a wide range of theories that have been used to shape our understanding of the economic processes that influence regional economic growth and regional economic development. Most of the theories we will cover in this lesson are referenced in your textbook readings at some point during the semester. I don't want to get so deep into these theories that we have to prove them mathematically, but I want you to understand that the concepts they espouse. Also note that these theories have evolved over more than 200 years, and thus some have been proposed and supported only to be later discarded as new theories emerge. The scientific process. I promise you this will not be the most exciting material you have ever covered in class unless you are keenly interested in this topic, but I think I will be able to provide you with enough context that these theories are relatable to your understanding of the economic world in which we live and how communities can actually influence their opportunities for growth and development. Before I begin, I want to quickly review the few basic concepts of economics that you need to understand for this semester. For most of you, it's been quite a while since Econ 101 or 102, so part 1 of this lecture will take you back to your early days of college level courses. That is, assuming that you have taken some macro or microeconomics before. The 4 concepts I want you to review with you include supply and demand, price elasticity of demand, diminishing marginal utility, and comparative advantage as it relates to trade theory. In supply demand, we have a chart showing quantity produced on the x-axis and the price of that good on the y-axis. As the price of the good increases, suppliers will produce more of it. However, the balancing market dynamic is that as price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. In an ideal world, the production and price levels would be set at the intersection of these two curves. Now, they're shown here as just lines for simplicity, but know that this in the real world is more of a curvilinear process. The second concept I want to deal with is price elasticity of demand. It's the effective coefficient that shows the strength of the relationship between the price of a good and the amount of that good that can be sold. If a good or service has perfectly elastic demand, theoretically, not practically, then the demand curve becomes a horizontal line. This means that the price does not affect the quantity demanded. Now, that's more theoretical than real, but the best example I can come up with for you is very high-end luxury goods. If the economy really goes into the tank, nobody is buying diamonds or an Icasa FE titanium motorcycle that sells for $300,000. Or perhaps in more modern terms, consumer space travel. For example, you can now book a trip through a company called Space Adventures to have a go around the moon on a SpaceX rocket for the low price of only $150 million. Now, in a tight economy, that probably demand goes away. It's fairly elastic demand, because do you really need in your lifetime to go on a trip around the moon? In perfectly inelastic demand, someone would be willing to pay any price to get what they want or need. And of course, a traditional example of that is water in a desert. You don't care if they're going to charge you $10,000 for 5 ounces of water. If you're in the desert, that's what you need to stay alive. But of course, the reality then is that the balance of price elasticity means how much are you willing to pay for a good or service. And this becomes important when we're considering valuing place too. If you think about tax rates as being the price you pay to live in a community, then your price elasticity is your willingness to pay those taxes to have the goods and services offered by that community. The third concept is diminishing marginal utility. And this gets a little more complicated. It's a more complex concept, but if you think about it, utility, which we think of as the value of a good, is something that we get from having it or using it. But in reality, that is not necessarily linear in concept. You have this little chart that you showed here. And as you can see, total utility rises more slowly as the price gets higher or as you get more of a good. So as the quantity, the units consumed increases, at some point your utility starts to level off and then maybe even starts to trend downwards so that the marginal value added by the next unit becomes smaller and smaller and eventually can even become negative. So if we think about our favorite consumption product, pizza, you get a coupon for a $5 large pepperoni pizza. That's a good deal. The coupon also says that for $5 more, you can get a second pizza. Not bad. Now you have enough for not only dinner tonight, but lunch later on. I'll give you a third pizza, but this is a special deal in that I'm only going to charge you $4 for that third pizza. Okay, so now we're talking about having friends over for a pizza party. The deal gets even better. The next 4 pizzas that we get cost you a grand total of $2 more. And then I'll sell you even 4 more for only 20 cents each. Now, when we started, if I said I will sell you a pizza for 20 cents, you would have said, bring it on. Bring them all on. But now, you've fed all your friends, your freezer is full, and quite frankly, you're even tired of the thought of eating another pepperoni pizza. And so no matter what that price is for that next unit, you don't want any more of it. Now let me give you another real-world example where this can come into play, and it's really kind of interesting. Using oil as an example, after being relatively stable for more than a year, the spot market price of West Texas Intermediate grade crude oil started to decline in late 2019 as our historically long economic expansion in the U.S. started to lose steam. Then in early 2020, demand dropped further as the spread of COVID-19 disrupted economic activities across several nations and demand for oil dropped. Now, usually when demand for oil drops, global oil producers lower their levels of production to support overall price levels. However, on March the 8th, at a meeting of OPEC members, Russia refused to go along with Saudi proposed production cuts. The Saudis retaliated with price cuts and actual production increases that sparked about a 50% drop in spot market prices. The markets received a brief respite when the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Russia agreed on April 9th to withhold 9.7 million barrels of daily production out of global markets. However, by this time, spot market traders became spooked about where all the excess production that was pumped in March would be stored. The largest U.S. facility is at Cushing, Oklahoma, and it was projected to be at capacity by early to mid-May. So keep 2 things in mind. It takes about 6 to 7 weeks for a supertanker to get from Saudi Arabia to the oil importation facilities on the Texas Gulf Coast. And the base charter rate for a supertanker is about $200,000 per day plus operating cost. So the oil in transit in the 3rd week of April had no set destination that could take it. On April 20th, we had an unprecedented event with West Texas Intermediate crude oil prices at the Cushing, Oklahoma storage facility dropping into negative territories. Traders paid buyers almost $37 per barrel to take the oil off their hands. That's an extreme example of price elasticity working. David Ricardo, who lived in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, introduced theories of trade between nations that include a few critical concepts that shape our understanding of where particular types of economic activity happen. Let's start with absolute advantage. When a nation, or firm for that matter, can produce a good or service that is higher in quality and lower in price than any other producer, they have an absolute advantage. It has been said that the U.S. has an absolute advantage in the production of airplanes. Of course, there can be non-economic reasons for a country to produce a product for which someone else has an absolute advantage. For example, Russia is not going to supply its national airlines with Boeing aircraft. Comparative advantage addresses more likely scenarios where countries have differing opportunities costs that change the make or import decision. Opportunity costs are trade-offs that occur because all resources are finite. College is an excellent example. You're spending your resource, time, that has some value to attend school instead of entering the workforce. From an economically rational perspective, you are giving up current earnings to be able to make better earnings later. By the way, this is economics expressed as dollar values, not satisfaction or happiness. So our choices of major are not always about earnings potential. From the perspective of nations, opportunity costs mean that there are production trade-offs. So let's go back to examples you may have covered in Econ 101, wine and cheese, using England and Portugal as examples. Both nations can and do produce both cheese and wine. However, there are serious trade-offs. Raising dairy cows takes a lot of pasture land. Growing grapes at mass production levels also takes up a good bit of land. And these are not compatible activities for crop rotation. You can't raise cows on vineyards out of season. Both countries are relatively small compared to the biggest nations. So productive land is a highly finite resource. Exacerbating this problem for England is its relatively small area of that nation where the weather is suitable for grape production, generally in the south, East Anglia, Sussex, Kent, Hampshire, and the southwest. Portugal, by contrast, has highly productive vineyards in every region. Therefore, from an opportunity cost basis, it makes more sense for England to concentrate more on producing cheese and for Portugal to produce wine. Portugal would have to give up too much productive winemaking capability to compete with England in cheese production. So remember, the important concept is comparable opportunity cost. You can even get to the point where your rational economic decision is not to make a product at all. England did not really have commercial vineyards until the 1950s. You have heard of port wine, which is named for the Portuguese city Oporto that is in the north. Port wine is fortified, meaning that after fermentation process is completed, brandy is added to the wine, which was done originally as a preservative. This was so that the wine could be shipped from Portugal to England without spoiling. If you buy port wine, many of the names are English, like Taylor's and Ware's, but all of these companies are based traditionally in the city of Oporto. Comparative advantage does shape the location of industry, creating industrial specialization across nations. But in practice, unless the opportunity costs are extremely high, all nations produce at least some of most of the products they consume for any number of social, cultural, or political reasons. That is, assuming the good exists. You do not want to enter a war if you can't produce at least some of your own food. One of the reasons Japan started World War II was because of breakdowns in trade negotiations dealing with oil. Japan does not have domestic sources of oil, but needed it to fuel their industries of the early 20th century. In modern markets, the dominance of China as a source of raw earth minerals that are used in electronic devices and batteries is a concern for market security. From another economic perspective that we have is that our analyses, both in terms of the way we conduct analysis and our theories, deal with two dimensions: a temporal or time dimension, and then a spatial geographic dimension. So it's not just where, it is also when that matters when we're doing regional economics. The remaining parts of this lesson will address the contributions of several regional development theorists. This is by no means a complete list, but offers a reasonably comprehensive overview that will help you with understanding your readings over the next several weeks. A sampling these include Johann von Thunen from the 1700s, Alfred Weber from the 1800s, Walter Christaller, all these are Germans as their name sounds, the 1930s. We will also talk about cluster analysis with Marshall, Izard, and Porter, growth pole theory, urban rent gradients, and then some other work dealing with the taxonomy of regional development. That's what we'll cover in the remainder of this lesson. Take a couple of minutes before you move on, take a break, and then start watching part 2 of this lecture.